Where is Aaron right now?
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Aaron here, and welcome back to the channel. Guys, I have 3 new criminal cases to tell you about. I'm gradually growing my list of active civil cases, civil suits, and criminal cases against either Scientology or prominent Scientologists who've donated a lot of money to Scientology. People who are either large financial contributors to Scientology or people who are very active in recruiting others to join Scientology. And here's a little chart of what we're looking at right now. We have 3 civil cases and 4 criminal cases. On the civil side, Bixler versus Scientology. This is the civil suit that Danny Masterson's victims have brought against Scientology and Danny Masterson for the harassment that they've experienced since coming forward regarding Danny Masterson. Haney versus Scientology. This is the civil suit. Val Haney is Shelley Miscavige's former assistant. She is suing Scientology and David Miscavige for a number of different items. Baxter and Paris versus Scientology. These are the 3 former Scientologists, former Sea Org members in Australia, who are suing for labor trafficking that occurred here in Clearwater, Florida, where I live, as well as on Scientology's cruise ship, the Free Winds. On the criminal side, we have, of course, the People versus Masterson. If you watch this channel, you've heard me talk a lot about that. This is Danny Masterson, and the case is regards the many women that he has attacked, shall we say. We have the United States versus Spina. That's one of the ones I'm going to talk to you about today. The People versus Rizza Islam. That's another one I'm going to talk to you about today. And the United States versus David Gentile. And that's another one I'm going to talk to you about today. We also have honorary mention of coming soon criminal case, fingers crossed, against Scientologist Grant Cardone for defrauding his investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars. All right, so let's just jump into these new ones. For the Jeff Spina case, personally, I find this one interesting because I actually know this dude. Jeff Spina is a very well-known Scientologist in the Clearwater, Florida area where I live, even though he doesn't actually live in Clearwater, Florida. He was a New York guy, but he spent a lot of time here at Flag. Flag is the name of the big Scientology organization here in Clearwater. And guys, a lot of you in the comments ask me if I've ever spoken about my story of leaving Scientology. And the reason I've never done a video about that on this channel is because I told most of that story on the TV show Scientology in the Aftermath. So if you have Netflix, you can watch Scientology in the Aftermath, Season 1, Episode 7, and that'll be most of my story. So I know Jeff Spina from my time in Scientology. I didn't really know his brother Jeff, and both of them were found guilty of defrauding Medicare, their chiropractors, of close to $80 million. And Jeff has donated millions upon millions of dollars to Scientology. And you can see Jeff Spina here getting an award from David Miscavige. Jeff Spina is a taller gentleman, and you can see just how tiny and childlike he makes David Miscavige look in comparison. That's a pretty funny photograph. Guys, let me start just by reading to you the press release put out by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York when they initially indicted and arrested the Spina brothers. The press release reads, 4 individuals charged in widespread scheme to defraud Medicare and other health insurance providers through fraudulent medical corporations and false billing, resulting in tens of millions of dollars in losses. Today, an indictment was unsealed charging James Spina, Jeffrey Spina, Andrea Grossman, and Kimberly Spina, oh my goodness, I didn't even know, with participating in a widespread healthcare fraud scheme through their fraudulent operation of Dolson Avenue Medical, a multidisciplinary medical clinic located in Middleton, New York. The defendants were all arrested today and presented in federal district court in White Plains. U.S. Attorney Jeffrey S. Berman said, as alleged, these 4 defendants purported to run a legitimate medical clinic that provides care and rehabilitation to patients. Instead, the defendants allegedly put aside their medical and fiduciary obligations for greed, attempting to bilk insurance companies and federally funded Medicare out of more than $80 million. FBI Assistant Director in Charge William F. Sweeney Jr. said the subjects in this investigation allegedly performed treatments patients didn't need, double billed for procedures, and upcoded. And here's the press release about the actual sentencing of Jeff Spina. It says, doctor sentenced to 9 years in prison in widespread scheme to defraud Medicare and other health insurance providers of millions of dollars. U.S. Attorney Audrey Strauss said James Spina led a sophisticated, widespread, and callous scheme that put greed and profits ahead of patients and their well-being. In doing so, he betrayed his professional obligations and bilked insurance companies and Medicare out of millions of dollars. Thanks to the coordinated efforts of federal and state investigative agencies, Spina will now serve a lengthy sentence in federal prison. Now, James Spina was sentenced to his 9-year prison term in April of last year. So why is he on my list? He is on this list because his brother, Jeff Spina, still has not been sentenced yet, but is scheduled to be sentenced next month. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what Jeff's sentence is, what we find out on October 28th. And the next case that I want to tell you about is the People versus Rizza Islam. Rizza's real name is Ronnie, which I didn't find out until today. But so Rizza's story is fascinating because it represents the strangest, most unexpected marriage of organizations I could think of, and that is Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam and David Miscavige's Church of Scientology. Did you guys know that these organizations had formed a partnership? And Rizza Islam sits right at the core of how these two organizations came to form a partnership, because Rizza Islam's stepfather is Reverend Alfreddie Johnson. And Reverend Alfreddie Johnson, although he was never officially married to Rizza's mom, Hanan Islam, who passed away recently, Alfreddie Johnson is the only father figure that Rizza has ever known. I don't know how Alfreddie Johnson got into Scientology, but it was in the early 90s that Miscavige started making Alfreddie one of the poster children, if you will, for Scientology. He gave Alfreddie Johnson one of Scientology's highest medals or honors. Well, it is the highest medal or honor, called the IAS Freedom Medal. It's the same medal Tom Cruise was awarded, but Tom Cruise got a bigger version. He awarded Alfreddie this medal, and Alfreddie was very instrumental in promoting some of the front groups that Scientology created. And in fact, Alfreddie started his own Scientology-sponsored front group called the World Literacy Crusade. And it turns out that it was through the World Literacy Crusade that Alfreddie Johnson, his wife, but not really wife, Hanan Islam, and Rizza Islam and other members of the family perpetrated a massive fraud, again, an insurance fraud, very similar to Jay Spina and his brother, taking young people from local schools and putting them through Scientology's Purification Rundown, which is just like a sauna, vitamins, sweat out program that Scientology believes rids the body of drug residues. There was actually an overlap between these two organizations of the World Literacy Crusade and the organization that Hanan Islam and Alfreddie Johnson created to run the insurance fraud relating to the purification program. Here's what was reported on the Underground Bunker blog about it. It says, on October 23, charges were filed against Hanan Islam, who in 2004 founded American Health and Education Clinics, an entity that was actually run out of the World Literacy Crusade, a well-known Scientology front where she was the executive director. She had pleaded not guilty to 4 felony counts, which include grand theft, larceny, insurance fraud, Medi-Cal fraud, and failure to file a tax return. 3 of Miss Islam's 10 children were also charged with felonies. Zakaya Islam pleaded not guilty to charges of grand theft, larceny, insurance fraud, and Medi-Cal fraud. Namat Islam and Ronnie Islam, that's Rizza, pleaded not guilty to insurance fraud and Medi-Cal fraud. One thing that's remarkable about this case is Alfreddie Johnson himself avoided getting dragged in and charged with any of this fraud because he didn't put his signatures on anything. He let Hanan and her kids sign all the paperwork and be the ones to get their hand dirty, while Alfreddie Johnson kept himself very nicely and legally protected from all of this. Now, the Nation of Islam is not involved in this criminal matter, but it's very interesting that Alfreddie Johnson himself is the one who brought Tony Muhammad, one of the high-ups in the Nation of Islam, into Scientology. Tony Muhammad then brought Louis Farrakhan into Scientology, and Rizza Islam himself is now himself a high member of the Nation of Islam and is a Scientologist. And even though these charges were first filed almost 7 years ago, everyone else in this case has either pled out or died, except Rizza. He's moving forward to a jury trial. Rizza's trial begins October 24th, and this should be incredible. We should see some craziness on display, a combination of Nation of Islam craziness and Scientology craziness. So that brings us to the third and last case I want to tell you about today, and that is David Gentile and GPB Capital. I have saved the biggest and the best for last. This is a $1 billion Ponzi scheme fraud that involves Scientologists who live right here in Clearwater, Florida. It involves David Gentile, is a Scientologist who's donated a lot of money to Scientology, and he's gotten his nieces and nephews into Scientology. In fact, I know for sure one of his nieces is an actual Sea Org Scientology staff member here in Clearwater, Florida. I know for sure that she is. I just don't know if she's the only family member that David Gentile has who's an official Sea Org member for Scientology. So anyway, it's hard for me to do this particular case justice. So let me just read a little bit from the press release from the United States Attorney's Office, Eastern District of New York. It says GPB Capital founder and CEO among 3 individuals indicted in private equity investment fraud. The defendants allegedly misrepresented GPB's performance and paid distributions with investor funds, i.e. was running a Ponzi scheme. An indictment was unsealed today in federal court in Brooklyn, charging 3 individuals affiliated with GPB Capital Holdings with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Defendants David Gentile, the founder, owner, and chief executive officer of GPB, and 2 others are charged with engaging in a scheme to defraud investors by misrepresenting the source of funds used to make monthly distribution payments to them. The defendants were arrested today, and Gentile will appear this afternoon in federal court in Boston, Massachusetts. The defendants misrepresented the holdings of GPB Capital through deceptive marketing practices, luring investors with promises of monthly distributions that would be covered by funds from the investments and not drawn from underlying invested capital. In truth, a significant portion of GPB's distributions were paid directly from investor funds. Jeffrey Augustine has covered the GPB Capital case exhaustively over at the Scientology Money Project blog. You can see here just a sampling of the articles he's written about this. And the most recent article Jeff wrote here, this is one that should have Grant Cardone very nervous. Jeffrey reports, GPB Capital Holdings criminal defendants Gentile, Schneider, and Lash seek wiretap evidence obtained by the FBI. GPB Capital Holdings CEO David Gentile had no clue. He had no clue his conversations and phone calls were being secretly recorded by people who worked for him. None of these people were willing to go to prison for David Gentile. So they went to the FBI for help. They did the right thing. Some of them wore wires into meetings, led by David Gentile and his accomplice Jeffrey Schneider. There are 200 recordings, according to the court record. While all this was going on, David Gentile was being a good Scientologist. He had a Scientology org board in his offices. He considered himself an upstanding member of the most ethical group on the planet, even as he was running a con on his 17,000 investors. Does that remind you of anybody? Because to me, it reminds me of Grant Cardone. 2 cooperating witnesses, and there may be more, wore hidden recording devices into meetings with David Gentile, Jeffrey Schneider, and other GPB Capital executives. David Rosenberg secretly recorded phone calls between himself and criminal defendant Jeff Lash. Scott Silverman, former legal counsel for an entity owned by GPB Capital Automotive Portfolio, wore a wire into meetings with David Gentile, Jeffrey Schneider, and other executives at GPB Capital Holdings. Silverman cooperated with the DOJ, FBI, and the SEC. Well, as I've discussed on some of the videos on this channel, the federal authorities are also investigating Grant Cardone and Cardone Capital, and Cardone Capital employees, insiders, whistleblowers, executives have also been secretly recording both audio and video of private meetings with Grant Cardone and other executives. And that is why Grant Cardone is on my list. I've got him listed as coming soon, criminal case number 5. Do I know for sure that that's what's going to happen? No, I don't. Do I think there's a pretty good chance that it's going to happen? Yeah, I do. That's why I've got him on my list. David Gentile was arrested in February of last year, and this case does not yet have a court date. They are still in the pre-trial phase. In fact, even today, David Gentile is in pre-trial conference. He's trying to argue that when the FBI simultaneously raided 5 of his various offices, that they took a bunch of material that Gentile just doesn't think is admissible. He's arguing that some of the material seized in the raids should be protected under attorney-client privilege. And so they're getting that sorted out along with a variety of other things, but this is going to be a hell of a case to keep an eye on. So those are the 3 new ones that I've added to my list. It is going to be a wild ride the next 12, 24 months. Scientology has a lot to be afraid of here. Scientology, David Miscavige has an awful lot to be afraid of. There's a variety of things that may come up in these cases that the government could use in building its case against Scientology itself. You'll notice that my list includes civil actions against Scientology, but the criminal actions are against Scientologists. I do believe that in the next 1 to 3 years, we will see actual criminal actions being brought against the Church of Scientology itself. So that is all I have on this for right now. Stay tuned to this channel for updates in all of these cases. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you as always to all of you who watch until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe